Lucas Vale stood at the window of his luxurious office, his eyes fixed on the city below. The skyscrapers seemed to mock him now, tall and proud, while he, the man who once stood at the top of the world, was staring into the abyss of failure. It had all started with a dream, his dream. Lucas had built Vale Technologies from the ground up, starting with nothing but an idea and a relentless will to succeed. He had been young, eager, and hungry for success. His company had grown into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and for a time, the world had looked at him as a genius, a visionary. But now, everything was falling apart. The stock market crash had hit his company hard. The numbers on his computer screen were all in red. His once thriving company was drowning in debt, and bankruptcy was only days away. He had watched the numbers fall, one after the other, each tick a reminder of how everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. Lucas had never been one to show weakness. He had always believed that if he worked hard enough, if he pushed himself and everyone around him enough, nothing could stand in his way. But now, as he stood in the center of his grand office, the walls closing in on him, he realized how wrong he had been. His vision, his ambition, had led him here alone, broken, and unable to fix the mess he had made. The phone on his desk rang, but he didn't answer it. There was no point. It was another call from his lawyer, telling him things he already knew. The creditors were circling, and soon, they would take everything from him. His office, his wealth, his reputation gone. With a heavy sigh, he slumped into the leather chair behind his desk, rubbing his temples. He had no idea what to do next. His life felt like it was crumbling around him, and he was powerless to stop it. The door to his office creaked open, and Lucas turned to see Sarah, the janitor, standing in the doorway. She was carrying her usual mop and bucket, dressed in a simple blue uniform. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if she were unaware of the storm that was raging in the room. "Mr. Vale," she said in her soft voice, "would you like me to clean up the conference room?" Lucas blinked, momentarily confused. Why was she here now? Of all the people in this building, Sarah was the one person he had never really paid attention to. She was always in the background, quietly going about her work, unnoticed by most. She was just another part of the building's machinery, doing her job, and nothing more. But today, her presence seemed different. It was as if, in a strange way, she was the only constant left in his world. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at her for a moment, taking in the sight of the woman who had worked for him for years, always in the shadows. She was tall, with kind eyes and a quiet grace that made her stand out, even if no one ever really saw it. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "you know about the company, don't you?" She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "I've heard the rumors, Mr. Vale." He let out a bitter laugh. "Rumors? It's not just rumors. It's the end. My company's going bankrupt. The investors are pulling out, and the creditors are about to take everything." His voice cracked with the weight of it all, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the full weight of his failure pressing down on him. Sarah remained quiet for a moment, but then she stepped into the room, placing the mop and bucket carefully down beside her. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said simply, her voice still soft but full of empathy. "But that doesn't mean it's over." Lucas blinked at her, confused. "What do you mean? It's over? There's no saving it now?" She shrugged slightly. "Sometimes, it's not about saving what's already lost. It's about starting again, finding a new way forward." Lucas didn't know how to respond. Her words didn't make sense to him. How could someone like her, someone who cleaned the floors, wiped the windows, and never had a say in the decisions of the company, speak as if she knew the answer to all his problems? But there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. Perhaps it was the calmness with which she spoke, or perhaps it was the sheer simplicity of her perspective. She didn't seem rattled by the same things that had shaken him to his core. Without thinking, he stood up and walked over to the window again. The view was breathtaking, as always, but it didn't bring him any comfort now. Instead, it reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he was about to lose. Sarah, noticing his silence, went about her work, gently sweeping the floor, wiping the desks, and straightening up the clutter in the room. She moved with a quiet efficiency, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After a few minutes, she spoke again, breaking the silence. "You've built something great, Mr. Vale. It's not easy to build something from the ground up. But even the greatest buildings need repair sometimes. Maybe this is your chance to rebuild." Lucas didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he believed her, but for the first time that day, he felt a small glimmer of hope, a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. As Sarah finished her work and began to leave the room, she turned to him with a final thought. "You'll find a way, Mr. Vale. You always do." With that, she closed the door behind her, leaving Lucas alone once more with his thoughts. But something had changed. For the first time in hours, he didn't feel completely helpless. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to start over. The next few days blurred together for Lucas. He woke up each morning with the weight of failure pressing down on his chest, dragging him through the motions of a life that seemed to be slipping away. His team had stopped coming to him with ideas, their faces filled with worry and resignation. His phone rang constantly, but he let it go to voicemail. No one had good news anymore, and even the sound of his phone ringing felt like an echo of his crumbling empire. It was a Thursday when it happened again. As Lucas sat in his office, staring at the endless emails, the door opened once more. This time, it wasn't a knock or a soft voice, just the quiet shuffle of footsteps. He looked up, expecting to see one of his assistants or a fellow executive, but instead, it was Sarah, the janitor. She was as calm and unhurried as ever, carrying her mop and bucket with the same quiet grace. Her eyes met his for a moment before she stepped inside, as if she had every right to be there. And in a strange way, Lucas realized she did. "Mr. Vale," she said softly, "I just wanted to check if you need anything before I start cleaning up today." Lucas blinked, surprised. She had never spoken to him like this before. He had always seen her as just part of the background, someone who came and went without a second thought. But today, her presence seemed different. There was something comforting in the simplicity of it all, something that made the noise of the world outside seem a little quieter. "No," he said, his voice a little raspier than he expected. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just trying to figure out what to do." Sarah nodded, but she didn't leave. Instead, she moved towards the corner of the office where a stack of papers had fallen to the floor, as though she had been cleaning without even needing to be asked. She worked in silence for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," she said, still sweeping up the papers with slow, deliberate movements. Lucas turned his gaze toward her, curious. "What I said?" "About how the company is going under," she continued, her voice still steady. "You said everything was lost. But, that doesn't have to be the case, does it?" Her words were simple, yet they hung in the air like a lifeline, something Lucas hadn't realized he'd been looking for until that very moment. "Sarah, you don't understand," Lucas said, his voice thick with frustration. "It's not just a few bad investments. It's everything. I've been trying to fix this for months. But I can't. No one can. The creditors are circling, the investors are pulling out, and the media is just waiting for the next scandal. I've failed." Sarah paused in her work and looked at him with an expression that was both kind and knowing. "I think you're looking at it wrong." Lucas was taken aback. "What do you mean?" She took a breath, placing the mop in the bucket and leaning against the wall for a moment. Sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's because it wasn't meant to stay the same. It wasn't meant to last forever. Maybe what you need is not to fix what's broken, but to build something new. Something better. The simplicity of her words hit him like a wave, washing away the frustration that had built up over the past few days. Lucas stared at her, trying to understand. Here was a woman who had no formal education in business, no years of experience with high-stakes decisions, yet she spoke with the kind of wisdom that many people far more qualified than her would never understand. "You think I should just give up?" he asked quietly, the skepticism still in his voice. "Walk away from it all?" "No, not at all," Sarah replied. "What I'm saying is that sometimes, it's not about holding on to what you've already built. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in knowing when to let go, and having the courage to start again." Lucas stood silently, his mind racing with her words. Let go. Start again. The idea felt impossible, but there was something in it that felt right. It was as if Sarah was offering him a different perspective, one that didn't come with a long list of strategies or business jargon. It was simple. Real. "I don't know where to start," Lucas admitted, his voice quieter now. He had spent years building his company, pouring his heart and soul into it. The thought of walking away felt like tearing apart a piece of himself. "That's okay," Sarah said, her voice soft and understanding. "You don't have to know everything all at once. Just take it one step at a time. Start with what you know you can control." Lucas thought about that. He could control himself, couldn't he? He could choose what to do next. The decisions didn't have to come all at once. They didn't have to be perfect. Just one step. "And if that doesn't work?" he asked, still unsure. "Then you take another step," she said with a smile, and Lucas couldn't help but feel a little lighter at her words. There was something about her presence, something about the way she saw the world that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of options. She didn't have the answers. But in a strange way, her simple faith in him made him believe he could find his own answers. Sarah gathered her cleaning supplies, preparing to leave as she always did. But before she reached the door, she paused and turned back to Lucas. "Whatever happens, Mr. Vale, don't let fear hold you back," she said, her words deliberate and full of care. "Fear makes the world feel smaller than it is. Don't let it trap you." With that, she stepped out of the office, leaving Lucas alone once again, but somehow, not quite as alone as before. As the door clicked shut behind her, Lucas stood there for a long time, lost in thought. Sarah, the quiet janitor who had never once asked for anything, had given him the one thing he needed most: hope. The following week felt different. Lucas woke up each morning with the weight of his problems still heavy on his mind, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer saw himself as someone standing at the edge of the cliff, ready to fall. Instead, he saw himself at a crossroads, facing a choice. Sarah's words echoed in his head: "Sometimes, it's not about holding on to what you've already built. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in knowing when to let go, and having the courage to start again." Lucas had spent countless hours in the past week going over every aspect of Vale Technologies, trying to patch things up, looking for ways to reverse the damage. But the more he analyzed it, the more he realized that his company's issues were not just financial. It was the culture, the vision, and his leadership. He had been holding on to a dream, but now it felt like that dream had turned into a nightmare. It was late one evening when he made his decision. He sat at his desk, the office lights dim, the world outside quiet except for the sound of distant traffic. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to draft another email to his lawyers and investors, but then he stopped. Instead of following his usual pattern of running from the truth, he decided to face it. Start over. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect. But for the first time in months, Lucas felt a sense of clarity. He picked up the phone, calling his closest advisor, Jonathan, someone he had known since the very beginning. "Jonathan," Lucas said, his voice steady but firm. "I think I need to step down. I've been trying to fix this company, but it's not working. I've been clinging to a version of Veil Technologies that no longer exists." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Jonathan spoke. "Lucas, you've been the face of this company for years. Are you sure about this?" Lucas let out a sigh, feeling the weight of the decision. "I'm sure. I think it's time for someone else to take over, someone who can breathe new life into the company." "I understand," Jonathan said. "But stepping down isn't the end, Lucas. It could be the beginning of something better. Just make sure you're ready to move forward." After ending the call, Lucas sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief because he had finally made a decision after months of uncertainty. Fear because he didn't know what would come next. But he knew he couldn't keep going down the same path. The next morning, as if by habit, Sarah came into the office to begin her daily rounds. But today was different. This time, Lucas stood up from his desk and walked over to her, his heart pounding a little faster than usual. "Sarah," he said, and she looked up in surprise, her mop in hand. "I wanted to thank you." She raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Thank me? For what?" "For everything. For your words the other day. They've made me see things differently." He hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. "I've been holding on to something that wasn't working, and I think it's time to let go and start over." Sarah's expression softened. She didn't say anything immediately, but her gaze held a quiet understanding. "You're welcome," she said quietly, the simplicity of her response carrying a depth Lucas didn't expect. Sometimes, all it takes is seeing things from a different angle. He nodded slowly. "I'm not sure where to start, but I know that I can't keep doing this the way I have been." "You'll figure it out," she said with a smile, her voice full of quiet encouragement. "Just take one step at a time." Lucas smiled back, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said again. The words felt like they were just beginning to mean something. For so long, Lucas had been used to being the one giving advice, solving problems, and making the hard decisions. But now, here he was, being reminded that sometimes, true strength comes from listening to others, especially those who don't have an agenda, like Sarah. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with Lucas meeting with his board of directors and informing them of his decision to step down as CEO. It wasn't easy, and the room was filled with uncertainty, but he stood firm. He explained that he wanted to take a break, to step away from the company, and that he would remain available to help with the transition. There was a mix of reactions, some surprised, some resigned, but none were as important as the feeling inside him. He had made the right choice. Later that afternoon, Lucas found himself walking out of the building for the first time in weeks. The air felt different, crisp, and even the clouds in the sky seemed to have a softness he hadn't noticed before. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to take the next step. As he stood outside, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message from Jonathan. "You did the right thing. Now, take some time for yourself. Figure out what you really want. The future isn't as scary as you think." Lucas smiled at the message and, for the first time in what felt like ages, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a new sense of possibility. He spent time walking through the city, visiting old places he hadn't seen in years. He called old friends and allowed himself to just be. He realized how much he had neglected his own happiness in pursuit of success, and now he was beginning to remember the joy of small moments, simple conversations, laughter, and even silence. On the fourth day, Lucas walked into a small cafe he used to visit regularly when the company was just starting out. As he ordered his coffee, the barista smiled at him, remembering him from his younger days. "Mr. Vale, right? Haven't seen you in a while. How's business?" Lucas hesitated, then smiled. "Business is taking a break. But I think that's exactly what I needed." The barista chuckled, clearly sensing a change in him. "Well, it's good to see you back. Whatever's next, I hope it's something great." Lucas nodded, feeling the truth of those words. Whatever came next, he was ready. Not because he had it all figured out, but because for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. For the first time in years, Lucas woke up without the looming pressure of emails, meetings, or financial reports. The silence in his apartment was unfamiliar, yet oddly peaceful. His days were no longer filled with constant phone calls or the noise of a high-powered career. Instead, he found himself looking out the window at the city that had always felt so overwhelming, yet now seemed inviting in its simplicity. The busy streets, the people rushing to work, the honking cars, all of it seemed distant, almost dreamlike. It was Monday morning, and Lucas had nowhere to be. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. For so long, he had defined himself by his role as CEO, by his company, by his ambition. Now, without all of that, who was he? He stood at the window for a long time, watching the world below. The feeling of emptiness had been replaced by a strange sense of freedom, but it wasn't the kind of freedom he had expected. It wasn't the kind of freedom that came with money or success. It was the freedom to simply be. In the following days, Lucas began a routine that was completely foreign to him. He didn't set an alarm, didn't schedule anything on his calendar, and didn't check his phone first thing in the morning. He took long walks through the city, exploring streets he had never noticed before. He visited parks, sat on benches, and observed people with a sense of curiosity he hadn't had in years. One afternoon, Lucas decided to take a trip to the small bookstore on the corner of a quiet street. It had been years since he'd taken the time to browse through books just for fun. As he walked in, the familiar smell of old paper and coffee filled the air. The bookstore was cozy and small, with narrow aisles and bookshelves that reached up to the ceiling. Lucas picked up a few books and began flipping through them. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but the act of simply reading for pleasure felt like a luxury. He found himself getting lost in the pages of a novel, forgetting the worries of his past life, even if just for a few hours. When he reached the counter to pay, the cashier, a young woman with bright eyes, smiled at him. "I see you've got some good ones there. You a fan of fiction?" Lucas smiled back, realizing it had been a long time since he'd had a simple conversation like this. "I used to read a lot. Just haven't made time for it recently." The cashier nodded, her smile genuine. "It's always nice to lose yourself in a good book. You'll be amazed at how much you can learn, not just from the stories, but from the stillness it brings." Lucas left the bookstore with a sense of lightness, the kind of feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He hadn't even realized how much he had missed these small moments, the quietness of reading, the simplicity of connecting with a stranger, the peace of just existing. Later that week, he found himself at a small cafe by the river, a place he had passed by countless times but never stopped at. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The river flowed calmly, and the sun began to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the water. As he sipped his coffee, Lucas reflected on his journey. The past few weeks had been filled with uncertainty and doubt, but now he could see things more clearly. The company had been a big part of his life, but it was not all of it. It had defined him for so long that he hadn't realized how much of himself he had lost in the process. He thought back to Sarah, the janitor who had changed everything with just a few simple words. Sometimes, it's not about holding on to what you've already built. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in knowing when to let go, and having the courage to start again. Her wisdom had been a catalyst for his change. Her quiet presence had reminded him of what he had been missing: the simple joys of life, the moments of peace, and the importance of taking time for himself. That night, as he walked home from the cafe, Lucas made a promise to himself. He promised he would never again allow his career or his ambition to define who he was. It was time to explore new possibilities, to live a life not measured by success or failure, but by the moments that truly mattered. The following day, Lucas called a meeting with his closest friends. It felt strange to not have the title of CEO anymore, but he realized that, in many ways, his relationships with these people had always been more important than his business achievements. Over coffee at a local cafe, Lucas shared his decision to step away from the company. "I'm not sure what's next," he said, "but I know it's not about the company anymore. It's about finding something real, something that matters." His friends listened attentively, their faces filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "It sounds like you've found a new direction," one of them said, a hint of pride in her voice. "It's brave, Lucas. Most people can't do that." "I'm just trying to be honest with myself," he replied. "For so long, I defined myself by what I achieved. Now I'm learning to find joy in the small things." After the meeting, Lucas walked out into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in years. There was no more pressure, no more deadlines, no more constant striving to be the best. He was finally beginning to see that there was more to life than success. There was beauty in simplicity, meaning in quiet moments, and purpose in being present. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas continued to embrace this new way of living. He took up painting, something he had always been curious about but never had the time for. He reconnected with old friends, traveled to places he had always wanted to visit, and spent hours in nature, just breathing in the fresh air. But through it all, he never forgot Sarah. It was her quiet wisdom that had sparked the change in him. He would never again take the small moments for granted. One day, Lucas returned to the building that once housed Veil Technologies. He stood outside for a long moment, watching the people inside go about their work. The world he had left behind was still there, but it no longer held the same grip on him. With a deep breath, Lucas turned away, knowing that the future, whatever it held, was his to create. It had been nearly 2 months since Lucas had stepped down from his role as CEO. He was slowly learning how to exist without the weight of constant decisions, deadlines, and meetings pressing on his shoulders. His days had become a rhythm of calm walks, visits to the park, and quiet afternoons spent reading. But something deep inside him was stirring, a feeling that he was only at the beginning of his journey. One morning, as he sipped his coffee at the local cafe by the river, Lucas found himself thinking about Sarah. Her words had guided him more than he had realized at the time. In the early days after his decision to step down, he'd thought that change would come quickly, that he would suddenly know exactly what to do next. But the truth was, change had been slower, quieter. It was a subtle shift, a transformation that was happening more within than around him. He had seen Sarah just once since that day she had spoken so kindly to him in his office. He had been meaning to go back and thank her properly, but somehow, the days slipped by. She had always been a quiet, humble figure in his life, someone who never expected anything in return. Yet, her words had impacted him more than he could express. That day, as he stood up to leave, he decided it was time to reach out. He would go find her, not just to thank her, but to see how she was doing. After all, she had been the one to help him realize that life was more than just the constant striving for success. It was about living fully, in the present, with the people who mattered. Lucas didn't want to make it sound like some grand gesture. He just wanted to have a simple conversation, one human being to another. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, or wanted him to be something he wasn't. But Sarah had no expectations. She had simply offered him a perspective that had changed everything. He drove to the office building where Vale Technologies once stood, his heart pounding slightly. It felt strange to be back in the place that had once been the center of his world, now empty and quiet. When he walked through the halls, the memories hit him like waves, the countless hours spent in meetings, the late nights working on projects, the pressure to always perform. But now, it all felt distant, almost like another life. The building was quiet, except for the hum of cleaning equipment in the hallway. As he turned the corner, he spotted Sarah, pushing her cart down the hallway with the same calm, measured pace that she always had. He called out to her, his voice a little unsure. "Sarah." She turned, surprised, and her eyes softened when she saw him standing there. "Mr. Vale." "I mean, Lucas," she corrected herself, still adjusting to the fact that he had left the company. "Lucas is fine," he said with a smile, walking toward her. "I just wanted to check in. See how you were doing." Sarah's face lit up, a warm, genuine smile spreading across her features. "I'm doing well. Just the usual, you know. Keeping the place clean, helping where I can." For a moment, there was an awkward silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just two people standing in a hallway, unsure of what to say next. But there was also a sense of shared understanding. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lucas began, his voice sincere. "About letting go and starting again. I wasn't sure what you meant at first, but now I think I'm starting to get it. I've been trying to figure out what to do next, and I don't have all the answers, but I'm not afraid anymore." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's all about trust. Trusting yourself enough to take the next step, even when you can't see the whole path. Sometimes, you have to let life unfold." "I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until now," Lucas admitted. "For so long, I had everything planned out. I thought I could control everything. But it turns out, I can't." "You can't control everything," she agreed, her voice gentle. "But you can choose how you react to what life throws your way. And that's where the power is." Lucas looked at her, his heart filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you enough. If you hadn't said what you did that day, I don't know if I would have had the courage to step away. You helped me see that it's okay to change, to let go of things that don't serve you anymore." Sarah smiled softly, her eyes kind and wise. "I didn't do much. You were already on the right path. You just needed to see it." For a few moments, they stood in comfortable silence. There was no need for grand speeches or complicated words. Just two people, quietly understanding each other in a way that only time and shared experiences could bring. "I've been thinking about something," Lucas said after a while. "Now that I'm stepping away from the business, I have all this time. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I want to help people, do something that matters. But I'm not sure how." Sarah tilted her head, considering his words. "Maybe start by helping one person at a time. Small acts of kindness, small moments of connection. That's how you build something meaningful." Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of her advice. It wasn't grand or flashy. It wasn't about making a big splash in the world. It was about making a difference in the quiet, unnoticed ways. The conversation drifted to other topics, and for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt a sense of peace. He wasn't running away from something anymore. He wasn't trying to escape his past. Instead, he was starting to understand that life wasn't about chasing endless goals or proving something to others. It was about being true to himself, to his values, and to the people around him. As they finished talking, Lucas realized that Sarah had become an unexpected mentor in his life. She had no titles, no corporate experience, but she had something far more valuable: wisdom, kindness, and a deep understanding of what really mattered in life. Before leaving, Lucas turned to her with a smile. "I think I'll take your advice. I don't have it all figured out, but I know that I want to make a difference, no matter how small. And maybe, just maybe, I can start right here." Sarah smiled back, her expression warm. "You've already started, Lucas. Just by being open to change." As he walked out of the building that day, Lucas felt lighter than he had in months. He didn't know exactly where his new path would lead, but he was no longer afraid of the unknown. With Sarah's words in his heart, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. Lucas woke up early the next morning, the first light of dawn creeping through the curtains. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel overwhelmed with what needed to be done or the endless tasks waiting on his desk. Instead, he felt a sense of quiet anticipation. It had been a week since his conversation with Sarah, and something in him had changed. He had realized that he didn't need to figure everything out all at once. The weight of planning his next big move had lifted, replaced by the desire to simply do something that mattered, to help others. But how? Where did he start? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he couldn't sit around waiting for the perfect opportunity to appear. Change didn't come through waiting. It came through action. After a quick breakfast, Lucas decided to visit a local community center he had heard about. It was a small place, tucked away on a quiet street in the neighborhood, but it had a reputation for helping people, offering support to those who needed it most. Lucas didn't know what he could offer, but he knew he had to start somewhere. The community center was a warm, welcoming place. When Lucas entered, he was greeted by a woman named Maria, who had worked there for years. She smiled at him immediately, her face kind and open. "Can I help you?" she asked. Lucas paused for a moment before speaking. "I'm looking for ways to volunteer. I've spent most of my life focused on business, but I want to do something more meaningful now. I'm not sure where to begin." Maria studied him for a moment, and then her smile softened. "It's good to see someone wanting to make a change. We have many programs here: food distribution, tutoring, helping families in need. But it's not just about the work. It's about showing up and being present. You'd be surprised at how much people just need someone to listen." Lucas nodded, feeling a sense of warmth in her words. "I think listening is something I can do. I've been so caught up in what I can offer financially or professionally, but I'm realizing that it's the simple things that really matter." "That's a good place to start," Maria said. "If you'd like, we could use some help organizing the food pantry. Or, if you prefer, you could just sit with some of the families and listen. Sometimes that's the most important thing we can offer." Lucas didn't hesitate. He could do this. He wasn't looking for a grand gesture or recognition, he simply wanted to connect. And he understood now that true connection started with listening, with showing up, without expectations. Over the next few weeks, Lucas returned to the community center several times. He worked with Maria to sort through food donations, helping package meals for families who couldn't afford groceries. He spent time with the children, helping them with their homework, offering encouragement where he could. And most importantly, he listened. To the young mother who was struggling to make ends meet. To the elderly man who missed his wife. To the teenager who felt lost and uncertain about his future. With each conversation, Lucas began to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: a sense of purpose. It wasn't the same kind of purpose he had felt as CEO, where success was measured by profits and achievements. This purpose was quieter, deeper. It came from simply being there for others, offering what little he had: time, attention, kindness. One afternoon, While Lucas was helping a young boy with his math homework, Sarah walked into the community center. She had heard about the work he was doing from Maria and had come to see for herself. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes warm with approval. "You're here again," she said, her voice gentle but with a hint of amusement. "Looks like you're making a habit of this." Lucas looked up from the boy's homework, a smile tugging at his lips. "It feels good. I didn't realize how much I was missing before. Helping out, seeing the impact even small actions can have, it's different." Sarah nodded, walking over to join him. "It's the difference between doing something for yourself and doing something for someone else. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just being present." "I guess I'm finally learning that," Lucas replied. "All these years, I thought success meant achieving something big, something measurable. But now, I see that real success is in the little things, the things that don't get talked about in the business world." The young boy looked up at both of them, his face brightening with a smile. "Mr. Lucas helped me with my math. I think I finally understand it." Sarah chuckled, watching the boy's enthusiasm. "See? You're already making a difference." Lucas felt a rush of warmth in his chest. The boy's excitement, the simplicity of the moment, was more fulfilling than any corporate achievement. It wasn't about numbers or profit margins anymore. It was about connecting with people on a human level. Over time, Lucas's involvement at the community center grew. He didn't have a grand title or position, he wasn't there to be recognized. He simply showed up, did what was needed, and listened. And in return, he found something he hadn't even realized he was looking for: a community. One day, after several weeks of working together, Maria pulled Lucas aside. "I've been watching you," she said, her voice warm. "You've been such a blessing to the families here. I can see how much they appreciate you." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just helping where I can. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it." "I know," Maria said, nodding. "But sometimes, the people who quietly make a difference are the ones who leave the biggest impact. Your presence here, it matters. More than you know." Lucas felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He hadn't expected to hear that, but it meant more than he could say. He wasn't doing this for recognition, but it felt good to know that his efforts were having an impact. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this, until I started doing it. It feels right." Maria smiled. "That's the beauty of it. When you're doing something that's truly right for you, it doesn't feel like work, it feels like life." As Lucas continued his work at the community center, he realized how much he had changed in such a short time. He was no longer the driven businessman chasing success at all costs. He was someone who found fulfillment in the small, everyday moments. Someone who understood that real success wasn't about how much you had or what you could achieve, but about how much you gave to others. And it was all because he had chosen to take that first step. The one that led him away from the life he once knew and into a new world, where real impact wasn't measured in profit, but in people. The weeks that followed were filled with small but meaningful changes for Lucas. As he continued volunteering at the community center, he realized something profound: helping others gave him a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever felt in his previous life as a CEO. He no longer measured success in business terms or profits, but in the smiles of the people he helped and the quiet moments he shared with them. One chilly afternoon, as he was helping Maria organize a fundraiser for the center, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The work wasn't easy, but it was honest. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. And that was more than enough. "How's it going?" Maria asked, coming up beside him with a stack of flyers in her hands. Lucas smiled. "I think we're ready. Everything is coming together." "Good. You've really helped this place a lot," Maria said, her voice warm with gratitude. I'm glad you decided to stick around. Me too, Lucas replied quietly. I didn't expect to find something like this. I thought I needed the company, the success, the power. But now, I realize I just needed to be present. To listen. To show up. Maria smiled, clearly pleased with his words. You're doing more than showing up. You're making a difference. And that's something money can never buy. Lucas nodded. The truth of her words settled deep within him. He didn't need to be a billionaire to feel valuable anymore. His worth wasn't tied to his bank account or the title he once held. It was in the people he helped, the kindness he shared, and the small moments of connection that made life meaningful. As the fundraiser day arrived, Lucas stood behind the registration desk, welcoming guests with a warm smile. The event was simple: a few games, a silent auction, and plenty of food. But it was enough. It was about building community, about offering people a chance to come together and support one another. By the end of the evening, the center had raised more money than expected, enough to fund several new programs for the families who relied on it. Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he looked around at the people who had come together to make it happen. None of them were wealthy, none of them held positions of power. They were just regular people, giving what they could to make their community a better place. As the night began to wind down, Lucas found himself standing outside, taking in the cool air. It was quiet now, the crowd having dispersed to their homes, but there was a sense of contentment that filled the air. He had made a real impact, and it felt different than any business deal or financial success he had ever experienced. This kind of success didn't come with applause or accolades. It came with something deeper, the knowledge that he had helped others in a way that truly mattered. It was then that Sarah appeared, her presence as calm and grounding as always. She walked toward him with a smile, her eyes reflecting the peace that seemed to radiate from within her. You did good today, she said softly, joining him in the quiet moment. Lucas smiled back. It feels good, Sarah. It feels real. For the first time in my life, I'm not chasing something. I'm just living it. She nodded, her expression knowing. Sometimes, we have to step away from everything we think we want to find what we truly need. I was so focused on being someone, Lucas admitted, his voice thoughtful. On building something that would make me important. But I didn't realize how much I was missing along the way. Now, I've found something better than I ever imagined. Sarah looked up at the stars, the same ones that had been in the sky when they first spoke all those months ago. It's funny how life works, isn't it? We think we have to have it all figured out. We think we have to know exactly what we're doing. But sometimes, the answers come when we stop looking so hard. Lucas stood beside her in silence, both of them staring up at the night sky. The stars twinkled above them, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of their individual struggles. In that moment, Lucas felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything he had learned, for everything he had experienced. I don't think I'll ever be the same, Lucas said finally, breaking the silence. I've changed, and I'm glad I have. You haven't just changed, Sarah replied, her voice gentle. You've grown. You've found a new purpose. And that's something worth celebrating. Lucas smiled at her words. I used to think purpose was about achievement, about success. But now I know it's about being present. About making a difference in the lives of others. Sarah gave him a soft smile, her eyes shining with warmth. Exactly. And I think you're going to continue doing that. You've already made an impact. You just have to keep going. As they stood there, Lucas felt a shift inside of him. It wasn't just about volunteering or doing good deeds. It was about living a life with meaning. He no longer felt lost or uncertain about the future. He didn't have to know exactly what would happen next. He just had to keep showing up, keep being kind, keep helping in whatever way he could. That night, as Lucas lay in bed, his mind quiet and content, he thought about how far he had come. He had once been a man driven by ambition, constantly chasing success and power. But now, he was a man who understood that real success was not measured by wealth or status, but by the impact you had on others. By the way you treated people. By the small, meaningful moments that made life beautiful. Lucas had learned that it was never too late to change. That even after a lifetime of striving for something that felt important, he could still find peace and fulfillment in the simplest of things. In helping others. In listening. In being present. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at home in his own life.